I am. It is my absolute honor and pleasure to be here today and hopefully get to know all of you. I understand that many of you may have experience with the healthcare system, as well as having worked with caregivers yourself. And just for me to not, do a very basic presentation, I would be very keen to understand what are your backgrounds, where do you come from, and what does the word caregiver mean to you? So let's start with a little bit about yourself. You could use the chat or you could speak up, depending on what you're comfortable with. And start with, what does the word caregiver mean to you? Anyone?
It's Tish Kalra here.
Yes.
I'm from Haryana, Hisar.
Yes.
Caregiver means anyone who is to be caretaker of someone sick. My mother-in-law was terminally ill. She was diagnosed cancer, and we family members took care. There being no palliative care center in Hisar, so we managed all those things. This is what caretaker means to us.
Okay, thank you, Satish. Anyone else?
We have a couple of chats coming in.
Okay.
Can I read it out?
Thank you. That'll be nice.
Okay. So Dr. Lalita says caregiver means giving care for a person who are weak physically or mentally. Mohan Kumar speaks about caregiver means that person who is with the patient at any time when the patient needs help. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yes, Raman.
Namaste, Ms. Bhavna. This is Mudre from Mysore.
Yes, hi Mudre.
Yeah. With certain experience, probably this is a very, very comprehensive term. Caregiver is a person who supports any other person who is vulnerable, whether it's physical or emotional or social, it could be economical. Not exactly in terms of palliative care. A caregiver can be any person who lends his support or provides his support, anyone who is vulnerable for these kind of problems.
Yeah.
It could be emotional instability or psychological problem or physical problem, emotional pains, whatever it is. It is a very, very comprehensive term. It doesn't exclude anything.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Thank you, sir. Ma'am, we do have one more comment. Sunita says that caregiver is someone who takes care of both patient and himself.
That's an interesting one. And okay, a caregiver is a member of a person's social network, helping them with activities of vulnerable living. That's an interesting one. That's a very nice one. Now, what is care? What does taking care mean?
It basically implies sharing. Caring is nothing but sharing of one's pain or one's pleasure, whatever it is. It's how we are able to participate in the person's life, which could be threatened because of this chronic disease or whatever it is. So when we start sharing those feelings, that's empathetically when we look at that and start working on that, how from current position, how we can move forward. Is there any possibilities? There is any process where we can support, we can participate. So that is caring. That has to be preceded by sharing anyway.
Okay, that's a nice one. And with your permission, I might reuse it. Anyone else? What does caring really mean?
Caring is also showing concern to the people.
Give me an example, Shanti.
Somebody like they are in need or upset, just be with them, like or otherwise somebody in need, just show that you're available to them. What example can I give? Suppose like somebody has to get something done from a bank, and now that being COVID and they're not, I mean, you can just always ask them whether they need any support or help. So that way you can, when you are passing by or when you know that they are not unable to do things by themselves, you can offer your help to them. Or like they said, like support, giving them support, that way supporting them or their work. That's how we show concern. That's what I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you don't have to explain what your approach is. I'm just trying to understand. So we use the word care, very commonly. And I'm just wondering, what is care? And therefore, in the context of a caregiver, what does care really mean? And can we have the same definition in this room, at least, now that we are talking about caregiver?
Yeah, Madam Bhavana, probably I would like to extend on and also endorse a few views expressed by my fellow learners. See, the caring is a part of sharing my abilities. So if I'm physically fit today, it doesn't carry any meaning if I do not share that. If I'm financially fit, I'm supposed to share that ability with somebody who requires that. A doctor shares his knowledge or her knowledge with the patient. With her skills, they'll be able to bring them to normalcy or keep them comfortable. The greatest part of caring is sharing the abilities what I have and putting it to a very constructive use for the benefit of others. Probably in terms of palliative care, making the quality of life better for others who require support. I do personally feel that the greatest disability is inability to share my abilities.
Isn't that a moral stance? I mean, you're taking a moral stance, right?
It could be. I do agree with you. It could be a moral stance. But it's if it gets driven well into a person's conviction, maybe a statement like Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah could be possible. It's a very utopian concept. But if every one of us starts sharing our abilities with people who are vulnerable, maybe we are going close to that Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah.
Okay. So let's kind of, instead of what our aspiration for it is, can we just like stay with what is our experience of care? Anyone else? What does caring for someone mean? What does the word I care for you mean?
Sunita here.
Hi, Sunita.
Hello, ma'am. Caring is like going out of our way to make others feel happy about themselves, confident about themselves, caring for their feelings.
So what is the difference between a caregiver and a caretaker? Anyone? Is there any difference between a caregiver and a caretaker? Come on, give it a shot.
That appears to be apparently a very tricky question, Madam Bhavna. Apparently it appears to me when you are playing with these words, caretaker is a person who assists a person in his daily activities, physical activities, maybe. And caregiver is a little bit a word that is more closer to the patient, where all the dimensions are being taken care by the caregiver. It could be physical, it could be emotional, it could be social or psychological, whatever it is. It has got its affection and love. Probably that is this premise on which a caregiver could be working.
Yeah. So caretaker or caregiver is often used interchangeably, right?
Correct.
It's like it's the same thing or a similar thing, right?
Synonym.
Yes, they could be synonyms. Are they synonyms? Because in one case you're using caregiver, in one case you're using caretaker. So are they synonyms or are they not synonyms? So if that is the case, who is a carer? And language has a big role to play in how an individual assumes a role. And which is why I would like to today highlight that in some medical conversations, you could even find that family members or other people related to the person ailing can often be referred to as bystanders, right? Have you heard that, any one of you? So sometimes if the family is referred to as bystander, that can have a certain connotation in your mind as to, what is the role this person is playing. But when we say caregiver, and when we say caretaker, and when we say carer, what are the nuances? Are there any nuances? And who is a caregiver? And if you see the screen right now, you will see there is a picture. Can you identify who might be a caregiver here? And if you really go into the English dictionary, caretaker is usually referred to as someone who looks after an inanimate object. So you would be a caretaker of a building, a caretaker of a museum, a caretaker of something. Yeah. So you're taking care of it. That's the English dictionary meaning. We have sometimes used that for people. The second thing is a caregiver or a carer might be interchangeable because they are referring to the person who is providing the care, and care might be holistic or care might be one aspect of care. So like some of you pointed out, there could be many dimensions to care. There could be physical care, there could be emotional care, there could be financial care, and there could be holistic care. So somebody who provides the overall care, in my mind, is the caregiver. And somebody who might be supporting in the care is perhaps a care assistant. Yeah. And I think it is very important for us to get our language right so that we know what is it that we are referring to. Usually, any takers in this picture, who do you think is the caregiver? There are many comments, I haven't kept track. Okay, caretaker is one assigned to duty. Caregiver is the actual giver, whether assigned or not. That's an interesting one, Satish. Caregiver जो pain reduce कर सके. Correct. Okay. Yes, someone has raised their hand.
Srikala, would you like to unmute and speak?
Hi, sorry, that was by mistake.
Sure, sure.
But you can speak nonetheless now that you're caught.
No, I just joined, so I'm
Okay.
figuring out. Yeah.
So there should be some prize for joining now, right? What do you think is, who do you think is a caregiver?
Caregiver is someone who is related to the patient, or somebody very close to the patient, who actually be with the patient 24/7. The invisible patient, maybe we can say. The
Okay.
family. Yeah.
Okay. And so would a nurse qualify to be a caregiver?
I doubt.
Okay. Anyone else? We were talking about language and how the name has a big role to play in terms of not just the role the person takes, but also the expectations that people around have when you give a certain name. And which is why, for a change, I have done this class very differently in the past. I thought it would be very important for us to dwell on the idea of who a caregiver is and what does caregiving really mean, and for us to have a common language so that we are all speaking the same language. I find that as the business of home-based care is increasing in India especially, we are finding that many organizations will say we provide caregivers, which means that they are providing people that can take care of your loved ones. They are also caregivers. Some people might call nurses and doctors caregivers as well. There are others who refer to family members as caregivers. Sometimes family members are called caretakers, and sometimes they are called carers, and sometimes they are also called bystanders. And if you look at this picture that I have posted, you will find that anyone in this picture would be both a caregiver and a care receiver. To my mind, care is the essence of connection or essence of humanity. It is the reason why we feel a sense of meaning and purpose that is beyond myself, beyond the idea of just surviving for myself, because I care for a family unit, I care for friends, I care for society, I care for my nation as a citizen, and therefore it forms who I am. It gives me a sense of purpose, and therefore it is the very essence of being alive or human. And certainly when there is someone who has to be taken care of when they are unwell. Someone said they're not able to view my screen. Lakshmi, can you just check that, please? Is it visible?
Sure, ma'am. We can see your screen. You're showing the first screen.
Yes.
Slide on who's a caregiver.
Yes. There's just a picture. Can Mohan Kumar, can you see it? If you're using a phone, yes, you may need to swipe right. Yes. And that's an interesting point, Ryan, that caregiver doesn't necessarily have an incentive. So you could have a caregiver who provides care like a profession, right? So there is a professional caregiver, somebody who gets compensated by money for it. And there could be a caregiver who is unpaid and who is not compensated by money for it. So they are not professional caregivers, but they do it out of love, duty, responsibility, or sometimes compulsion. And therefore, caregiver is a very broad term, and there could be many nuances to who a caregiver can be. In this particular picture that I'm showing, I believe that everyone is a caregiver and a care receiver. That said, I'd like to tell you all my favorite story in the recent times, and which is about a legendary anthropologist, Dr. Margaret Mead. How many of you here have heard me say this before? I see some familiar faces, so I'm just checking in. Has anybody heard the story of Dr. Margaret Mead before? Rajalakshmi definitely has. Other than that, no?
No, ma'am.
No. So Dr. Margaret Mead is a legendary anthropologist, and she studied various cultures across time and studied what it meant to, her seminal work is around actually sexuality in various cultures, etc. However, as an anthropologist who had studied societies, cultures that have developed over a period of time, in a seminar was asked, Dr. Mead, what is the first sign of civilization? And any guesses? If you were asked, what is the first sign of civilization, what would you say? What is the first sign of civilization, anyone over here? In any society? Guys, this is not meant to be a didactic teaching class. So this is meant to be an exchange. So I'm looking forward to you all participating. Any idea? Any guesses? What would be a good sign of a civilization?
Organized living.
Okay.
In a community.
Okay.
And probably that will be the first,
Okay.
How in the community, how we are going to live with
sure.
people.
Sure.
That will be the, and
Sure.
obviously that will be entailing how we are going to maybe again in a community living, with its pain or pleasure, how we are going to share with all those people.
Certainly. Ryan says,
should,
yeah, yes. Sorry, you were saying something?
Yeah, that should be the primary indicator of this, civilization.
So Ryan says, follow some sort of structure or rules. Satish says, cordial living in a community. Anyone else? So there's a book by Ira Byock in which she mentions this particular incident and said the person who was asking the question was perhaps expecting a response like organized living, tools, a cooperative community that helps each other, or there was farming, or let's say, organized living or roles and division of labor. And guess what Dr. Mead said? She said to me, the first sign of civilization is a healed femur bone. The femur bone is our thigh bone. In the animal kingdom, if an animal broke their femur bone, it would be a sure shot death. The animal wouldn't survive long enough to have a healed femur bone. But a healed femur bone indicates that someone cared enough to bound up the wound and nurse the person back to health. So if you see a healed femur bone, it is the first sign that someone cared. And that is the first sign of a civilization. It's a very powerful story for me. I don't know how you feel about it.
I think it's a very wonderful thing. Probably in any section of this, probably in the animal kingdom, survival is so difficult when you are hurt. Definitely, you cannot survive in that animal kingdom. Only, but this is an indicator that somebody has cared for. Somebody has tried to repair that bone and see that the person lives well. I'm really astonished with the kind of example that has been given. Wonderful, madam. Thanks so much. Very moving.
It's one of my favorite stories. It overwhelms me even as I say it. So I don't know if you noticed it. But it is a very powerful story for me. Having said that, I think it is important also. So to the spirit of our cultures have often said that we are nothing individually and that we matter only as a collective and with respect to each other. All of us are, if we go back to our cultures or our roots, will indicate the same thing. That said, there are some perspective and quotations which I find they just ring home in a very beautiful way. The other one is by someone called Rosalind Carter. Rosalind Carter is the wife of ex-President Jimmy Carter. She has been a long-time advocate of caregivers. You can imagine she's in her 90s today, but many, many years ago, as she was working to advocate the cause of caregivers, which is predominantly women across the world, very interestingly, because we do have gendered roles. Men perform a different set of roles and women perform caregiving roles. So Rosalind Carter says that there are only 4 kinds of people in this world: those who have been caregivers, those who are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. I'd really like to hear reflections about this quotation. Anyone? What do you think about this quote?
This is the perpetual truth. One day or the other, we may require palliative care, and one day or the other, we'll be providing palliative care. One day or the other, we'll be receiving palliative care, or we could be receiving at this very moment. So this is the truth. This is the truth anyway.
Thank you. Anyone else? Very quiet group of people. I was told that this would be like a very interactive session. So, anyone else?
Either way or the other, like we will fall into one of the groups. So either we have been giving caregivers, or currently we'll be receiving, or we will be needing. So throughout our life, I think one stage after the other. So one time we might fit into any one of the roles, I think.
I would think so. Well said. And you know, at different phases and different stages, we will be in different roles. Exactly. And sometimes we could be in more than one role as well.
Yeah.
So once I was in a seminar and we had reached a very interesting point, and this was at the peak of the second wave. And we were talking about caregivers and caregiving. And one person in the audience asked me that I have been on the wheelchair for the last 8 years. And I think I'm a burden on my family. I wish I would end this, and I would like to end my life so that I am no longer a burden on the rest of my family. It was a very difficult question. And what do you think I should do? And I narrated this story, which I would like to tell you all, which is that my father had terminal illness, and he had something which is called a neurological condition. It is called multiple system atrophy. And it is more than 20 years now since he passed. But at the time that he was deteriorating in his health, many times when I look back, I would say that my mother was the primary caregiver. And I didn't see myself as a caregiver in that setting. It's only many, many years later that I realized that while my mother certainly was the primary caregiver, I was also the caregiver. And it was only in that conversation that I told this particular person that actually, if you look at it, while my mother was the primary caregiver and she used to look after my dad's physical and many other needs while he was ailing, every day, my mother, who was a teacher, who used to go to work and wear a sari every day, my father would give her a safety pin to tie her sari. And for many years, after my dad was gone, my mom needed emotional care, which my dad used to provide, although he was a care receiver. So in many ways, he was the caregiver as well. And I believe caregiving and care receiving comes in many forms and shapes. So it is not just physical care. And those who seemingly appear like they are receiving care, in many ways, give care of another kind. I remember when my grandmother was unwell, literally, she was holding the whole family together. So you might think that she is the care receiver, but in so many ways, she was the caregiver to the whole family. And if you look around you, you will find that caregiving and care receiving has many nuances. And one of the first things that I would like to highlight, therefore, in today's session is that we pay a little more attention to who we think is a caregiver or a care receiver and what is care. And then we can have a conversation around caregiving in modern times, etc. I'd be very keen to hear any reflections to the 2-3 stories that I have told you. Anyone? No? Thank you, Preeta. Let's take a moment. I would like to hear some voices. It's not fun speaking to 10, 12 black tiles. Imagine if we were to step into the world of a caregiver. What do you think would the universe of someone who is a primary caregiver look like? So now we are saying while caregiver and caregiving and care is such a universal idea, Shanti, it's a good idea. Please turn on your video. At least I will be seeing you. Everyone else has turned off their videos. It's not nice. So those of you who can turn on their videos, that'll be very nice. And those who can't, that's okay too. Now, let's visualize the universe and the world of a caregiver. What do you think it looks like? Anyone? Let's kind of just populate that world. If we were to experience it from their side, the primary caregiver of someone. Anyone?
It has a toll.
Mm-hmm.
It has physical toll, emotional toll.
Yes.
It has financial toll,
Yes.
maybe social toll too, because
Yeah.
many times caregivers remain isolated
Yes.
and they get insulated from outside world
Mm-hmm.
without even sharing their problems.
Mm-hmm.
They keep telling about the patient's problems,
Mm-hmm.
but what they are undergoing,
Mm-hmm.
they may be trying to put up a very brave face, a smiling face,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a mechanism to cope with,
Mm-hmm.
but internally they would be burning.
Mm.
But probably the sense of commitment to the patient
Mm.
keeps them going forward,
Mm-hmm.
provide that required care.
Mm.
Caregivers do burn.
Mm.
If it's a matter of 3 months, or 4 months, or 5 months, 6 months, there is a chance to recoup later.
Mm.
But what happens to a caregiver who has to manage a patient who is going to be patient for a number of years,
Mm.
like a bedridden paralytic patient, or a
Mm.
child with muscular dystrophy, or a child with cerebral palsy?
Mm.
What goes on in the family?
Mm.
Normally, it is not visible at all outside.
Mm.
But when outsiders do visit the house, it is always an occasional thing to meet, and the brave faces always put up,
Mm.
and things appear to be as easy as it can be handled.
Mm.
But in reality, they'll
Mm.
be draining, they'll be
Mm-hmm.
burning out.
Mm. Would anyone else? Yes. Human beings have a need to love just as they have a need to be loved, but in the long term, it can be draining. I hear you. Anyone else? The more voices we hear, the better it is. Even if it is a repeat, it doesn't have to be a unique perspective. I'm certain that there is nothing that I can tell you that you don't know already.
In Jainism, there is a concept of Santhara.
Mm-hmm.
When I am no more useful to the world, then there is they would say that, okay, I say goodbye to the world. And that situation could be in a state when one is unable to support, one is so much dependent on others. So within our own country also, something like euthanasia exists.
So let's kind of look at the world of the caregiver. We are talking about the world of the caregiver.
Like they say in palliative care that when we see a patient, we see invisible patients also. So the caregivers are, in other words, they're also invisible patients because they need more concern or like care, like as much as they give, and they might, I mean, probably could be leading to burnout also.
Yeah.
And so they need more of support. So they're more of a warrior, and they need much more support than as much as the patients, you can say, like as much as they give. Like you said, how you cared for your father, like your mom was caring, and then you were taking care of your mother, maybe, like in other words, not directly, so indirectly it keeps like moving like a chain. So you take care of your mother, and mother takes care when she was taking care of your father, like that. So it goes as a chain for the whole family. And actually, like I said, the patients, they'll be the binding factor for the whole family. So as long as somebody's sick and the need was there, so everyone's concern would be there. So it's keeping them all together like a link, binding them together. Most cases we see that once the person goes and then the bondage, the thing breaks away. So the common goal or common concern is gone. So sometimes it happens in some families also.
Okay. What must be going on so the question that we are trying to get in touch with is, my guess is many of you are caregivers and some of you may have provided long-term care yourselves. What do you think is going on in the world of a primary caregiver? And I have a short film to show you. So let's just have a look at this. Can you see my screen? Can you hear it?
Yes, it is there.
Audible?
Audible.
Actually, it is not audible for
Audible.
us.
Yeah.
Can see, but it's not audible.
It's not
Okay,
audible.
hang on.
Myself.
What did you do to take care of yourself?
Take care of myself?
Emotionally.
To be honest, nothing.
There was a period when I had gone to the doctor and he said, "You're clinically exhausted."
You don't know which way you're heading. You don't know where to start or where to finish.
I can't trust anybody else with my husband. I want to do it on my own.
Focus on giving the level of comfort, giving the right treatment, supervising the treatment. You go to become a counselor sometimes you go to scold them like a parent, sometimes you go to be really loving and caring.
There used to be a time when I just slapped my husband. Said, "What are you doing? Come on, try to understand."
At the end of the day, if anything happens, then I have to step in. So that responsibility and that onus does lie with me.
They put their life comes to a standstill.
It becomes literally like a role reversal.
You have to really recondition your mind to not feel guilty
and make you realize that this is a part and parcel of life, and that doesn't mean that you have to bring your life to a standstill.
So why did I do this for myself? Or why am I watching so much of Netflix? I feel I deserve it.
If I could find little time to sit down and paint, that would give me a lot of energy and happiness.
It's about being a doctor, being a nurse, being an oncologist, or being in palliative care, and one would take a lot of pride that saying that well, I've set up this facility on palliative care. That would be a matter of pride. But in one's own personal life, caregiving is pretty much a very thankless job.
Quick comments on that. Yes.
It's very true, Ms. Bhavana. It is thankless, but to feel thankless, is it appropriate? That feeling comes, but is there any sense of guilt in that? I'm not very sure about it.
Okay.
Because if I'm doing something for my child or something for my parent, I do it with certain sense of responsibility and supported with love and affection.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm expecting something in return, even maybe a non-verbal acknowledgement, that may not be appropriate in my view. Sincerely, it's my personal view. But ultimately, it has to be done when it has to be done, you should skill yourself to see that you are available to your child or available to your parent always. You need to upskill yourself. You need to physically condition yourself. Your energy level has to be high because you are committed. There is a situation that you cannot get away. The best thing is to see that you get yourself skilled for that. I mean, this may be a very utopian kind of thing. This may not be applicable for everybody. The level of understanding could be different. Ultimately, this thing has to be that sense of, if my mother has taken care of me for the last 10 years, 12 years, till I become independent. It's a matter of a sense of reciprocation. Last few years, can I not take care of her? And well, can I not do that? It is not only sense of reciprocation. It has to be coupled with the affection, love and affection. It's my mother.
So let's just kind of reflect on, I'm just going to take in a few more comments, if you don't mind. I'd like to hear
please,
some more voices.
Please.
Yes. Anyone else? And, you know, this is fine. This is one way of looking at it. Your stance need not be the same. The more diverse it is, actually, it is better. I see some comments. I'm sure all of you can read that. I relate with, and for me, it can feel like a thankless job. Caregivers need to have a life of their own. And, you know, when the relationships change, it impacts. To be unconditional and to have this high moral ground can be exhausting. And yes, small changes can make you feel victorious. All of that is true. And with that, I'd like for us to get a perspective on the socio-cultural context in which a typical caregiver is. I think that, yes, it is very strenuous. I think that we have an environment in which we place very significantly moral standards of what kind of caregiving and what is good caregiving and what is expected. So I think that it is important to keep in mind that we can have a moral stance that may not necessarily apply to everybody, and everybody does not need to comply to that. So the challenges for caregivers can be complex, diverse, and unrecognized. The first is that we do have a very strong moral compass as a society. But we must remember that we live in urban nuclear families, which means that very often urban families are distributed, or they are not necessarily cohabiting, or they can be more than one person working, and they could be that, you know, the clear responsibilities of roles might not be there. What does that mean? Yeah. The fact is also that increasingly communities are fragmenting. The moral standards that we get, the traditional view of looking at things, comes from a time in which communities were constructed in a different way. We had different everyday pressures, different everyday stimuli. Today, we have very different communities. The expectations from family for caregiving have continued to be the same as they have been for a very long time. And Esther, you make a great point about the society makes a caregiver feel very guilty. And, therefore, we imbibe a lot of the social conditioning without anybody really saying or doing anything. And that is very important to consider. Finally, there is a disproportionate pressure on women because caregiving is considered to be something that either women know simply because they are women, or they are better at it simply because they are women, or they are expected to do that as their primary work. A large number of women give up their careers and their dreams for themselves because caregiving should take priority. That's the socio-cultural context world over, actually, but significantly in India. Now, when it comes to long-term care, in case of incurable conditions and terminal illnesses, or conditions that are chronic and require everyday care, there is the complexity that gets compounded by saying that your dependence on the medical system or the doctors is relatively less. If you broke a bone and you went to the doctor is likely to kind of fix you, and you will have a 21-day to 3-month max period and you will be back. In the case of incurable conditions or chronic conditions or life-limiting conditions, there is a consultation with the doctor, but only that much. The caregiver and the primary caregiver carries something called the caregiver burden, which can be traumatic, and that very often is unrecognized. So when we say something like, this is my duty and this is something I should be doing because I was taken care of when I was brought up, it is not the same. When we are bringing up a child, there is hope of future. This is what this child will grow up to be. There is, taking joy in learning new things. When there is terminal conditions, or there is incurable conditions, or there is steady deterioration, it is the other side of the hill. So to watch futility, to watch hope go on a daily basis, to see someone deteriorate and potentially die can be very, very exhausting and draining. It is not the same as bringing up a child. Yeah, any comments so far? Yes, no, maybe, or you want to just listen what I have to say? Okay. So what are some of the implications or some of the phenomena that can happen when there is long-term care, there is inadequate support systems or the medical system, there is no cure, or there is no expert like a doctor that you have to go to, you could go to, or somebody who could give you an assurance that things will get better. In that case, there is an implication of stress. Yeah. Will my life ever change? Will this get better? Do I have to be vigilant at all points in time? What if something happened? What if something happened behind me? So that whole point of I cannot go for a movie or a break. What if something happened while I was having an ice cream? Yeah. Will I ever be able to forgive myself for not being on the scene? There is a very strong correlation between caregiver depression and long-term care. And the format of grief, which I'm sure all of you have gone through, that the caregiver experiences is the anticipatory or complicated grief. Just today, I was reading an article, and maybe I will share it with all of you. It is about how many people, especially those who are looking after the terminally ill, actually experience relief at the death of the patient. But it is so socially unacceptable to be able to even talk about it. But they could be experiencing relief for, let's say, their loved one, or they would be experiencing relief from, oh my God, what would caregiving come down the line? And will I be able to cope and do my best? And so on and so forth. Have you done the sessions on anticipatory grief and complicated grief? I will accordingly talk about it or not.
Not yet, ma'am.
Okay, so very quickly, anticipatory grief, as the name suggests, is the experience of grief in anticipation. So there is no legitimate reason for, let's say, a loss hasn't happened. The person hasn't really gone, but you are grieving because you will experience that loss. So that is anticipatory grief, and that can be quite debilitating. Complicated grief, on the other hand, is when there are mixed feelings around it. For example, you could feel a sense of relief, or it could not be necessarily a happy relationship. There could have been a lot of baggage in that relationship, but you were looking after that person out of duty, social compulsion, or there were some other difficulties, or there were huge medical expenses. So the experience of grief is very complicated. All of these things that do not have a space for the person to express themselves, either with someone else who will understand it, or in general feel okay about it. Because very often caregivers will feel, what kind of a horrible person am I if I think like this, right? If they are not validated in some form, it will have implications, it will add to the trauma that they are experiencing, and it will have implications for their mental health. You know, I often use this example of caregiving is like gardening. It is what the caregiver cannot do anything about when the flower will bloom or when the fruit will happen. The caregiver just makes sure, like a good gardener, that the conditions for blossoming, healing, growing are right. And the rest depends on a large number of other factors. And for that environment to be right, a big part is the mental health of the caregiver. The mental health of the caregiver is deeply impacted because of the various conditions that are there in the world of a caregiver, and therefore important for us to appreciate that. I would like to spend most of my time on this concept, which is compassion fatigue. How many of you have heard about it? Do you know how to raise your hand? I'd like to see some hands raised now. How many know about compassion fatigue? Anyone?
We have heard of this term, but actually I have not understood what it is.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. So what I'd like to say over here is that the work that a caregiver does is physical and it is emotional. Yeah, so there is some work that has to be done in terms of physically looking after a person. There is some work that has to be done mentally in terms of saying, okay, this time doctor, this time medicine, this time planning. So there is some mental work, and there is a very significant emotional work, which could be as simple as keeping a brave front, like you pointed out, which is that when someone visits, then I have to keep a brave front and say all is well and all will be well, and you know, today is another day, kind of a thing. That state of mind requires an emotional investment. That is an emotional drain on the caregiver. The caregiver has to offer, therefore, empathy or compassion. Empathy and compassion cannot be offered cannot be offered like forever without being replenished. There is a limited container of our capacity to offer empathy and compassion, and we can run out of it. Compassion fatigue is when we run out of our ability to be compassionate. It's very classic in Bombay. A large number of people think that you know, there could be a bomb blast, but people will be very resilient and they will get back and get on with life the very next day. That's one side of it. The other side of it is people have run out of compassion. There is stuff that has happened for so many times, or they are just so numb that, you know, difficult things continue to happen, and you just don't have the capacity to make an emotional connection, to offer compassion, or to indulge in emotions. That is compassion fatigue. And compassion fatigue takes away your ability to provide a caring and a healing environment. This is true for doctors and nurses as well. We know that those doctors and nurses who are good, who are healers, are also those who have good compassion. Many of you may have seen Dr. Devi Shetty's presentation or his work, and he says many people just want to see my face. They just want to see me say, it's okay and it will be okay. Yeah. But if he sees difficulties and if he numbs himself and if he makes a distance and if he runs out of his compassion, then he will not be the same quality of a healer or a doctor or a nurse. And that the same thing is true for family caregivers. So if family caregivers are involved with many other things, let's say there are children to be taken care of, there is their education to be taken care of, there is money running out, there might be some legal issues, and there is a person who is unwell, and this person is not getting a break. It is only human to get tired. And that is compassion fatigue. Any questions?
The most logical question would be, how do we recognize this and how do we come out of this?
Yeah.
How do we sustain this kind of empathy and compassion?
Right. So we will talk about that. The next issues that impact, and Esther, yes, we spoke about social conditioning and how our mental health can be a function of social conditioning. I'm not sure exactly what your question is, but I do think that when a society accepts or validates something, then it's a little easier. It's a little easier on the mental health. When there is a lot of judgment, there is a lot of push, there is a lot of expectation, then that impacts mental health very, very differently. We know that in case of addictions and mental illnesses, for example, if there is isolation or if there is some kind of alienation, then that impacts mental health. And many ways that alienation happens because either people are afraid of being judged or they are judged. So yes, societies could cause mental health issues. The last thing is about feeling guilty, angry, or frustrated. Now, caregivers could feel, if we take a moral stance and say, this is your duty and this is the least that you can do, and this is, you have received this and therefore this is now your debt to return, then it becomes very difficult for a caregiver to say, I feel guilty about taking a break, going and having an ice cream. I feel angry at my situation. Why am I going through this? I feel angry with the person who is unwell because of which I'm now bound, or I'm frustrated that I have to do the same thing again and again and again. Now, if a person cannot express their emotions, and these are human emotions, there is no judgment on whether this is a good emotion or a bad emotion. When we do not allow for these emotions to be expressed, when we say, oh, you have to be positive, you cannot be positive at all points in time. There are times when you will be overwhelmed and feel negative and lost, and that should have as much space as your positive emotions. So the feelings of guilt, anger, and frustration that can often create a vicious cycle can typically impact your mental health and your level of, therefore, well-being and create burnout. The other, finally, issue is that 60 to 80% of the caregivers are women. They are expected to do this. They are expected to prioritize this. And as a woman myself, I know that it can be quite a hard battle to push back and say, no, I can do caregiving in my way, which is not necessarily the ideal. This is my best. And the expectations also on caregiving for men and women are very, very different. The standards are very different. and the judgment of what one does as a caregiver is also very different. So for example, we know that 74% of the caregivers in India are daughters-in-law who may have been volunteered into that role, whether or not they necessarily have that level of love or compassion or sense of duty to that role. Any comments? What I'd like to therefore highlight is that caregiving is invisible. It is often unrecognized in the sense that the details and the nuances are not recognized. Very often, caregivers pose a positive front end, and they are not necessarily appreciated. And certainly their needs are not taken care of, and therefore they are underserved. And the most difficult is whether or not their mental health is of priority. So caregivers themselves deprioritize. And when there is someone who is very unwell, then clearly the priorities fall in a certain way, and that has its implications. Let me have a look at the comments. So if there are any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself. It's a little difficult for me to keep looking at the chat and looking at the comments. Now, it is important for us to recognize that caregiving in India is at the intersection of complex and multidimensional challenges. The first one being socio-cultural, the fact that caregiving is noble, it's a family duty, and the fact that we will do anything to live longer. We have an idea that living long is desirable as opposed to living a full life. So for those of you who may have seen Hindi cinema and may have seen the very popular film Anand, Zindagi lambi nahi badi honi chahiye is, I'm sorry for those of you who don't understand Hindi, but basically the idea being that as opposed to a long life, a fuller life, a life that has had many cherishable moments, that has had significance, is more important. But we seem to be oriented towards saying, oh, that was so tragic because it was a young death, or that is okay because that person died when they were in their 80s. We seem to be wanting to do anything and everything in terms of interventions to make the person live longer. And as palliative care people, you know that how that has implications. So that's the socio-cultural aspect. The second is the fact that there are gender roles and stereotypes. Most often, caregivers are women. More women are nurses as well in these professions. And then certainly in homes, women are expected to do this work, which is not paid for because it is duty, it is noble, it is because you're women and you're better at it. But it is not necessary. Not all women are the same. And not all women have the desire to be that, play those kind of roles, especially in the modern world. But there needs to be dignity of labor as well for those who do this work. Finally, we do not fully understand mental health as a humanity, but certainly in India, accessing services or professional services for the sake of our mental health is something that we haven't learned yet how to do. It is a taboo. We will usually go to friends and family. We will not go to a psychotherapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Many of us will not even know the difference between the three and know when to go to who. So caregiving in India is at the intersection of these three very, very complex ideas. And therefore, it becomes a big challenge. Just to quote some numbers, in India, as per the Oxfam 2020 report, women and girls do 3.26 billion hours of work every day, which is unpaid care related work. Yeah. Moving on, caregiving has multiple challenges and needs. We have done some research according to which the dilemmas and the challenges of caregivers are: first, self-care versus patient care. Should I look after myself or should I look after the patient? What should be done first? What comes later? Everything is important. And very often, self-care falls down. People make these statements like, in an aeroplane, put the oxygen mask on yourself first. But in everyday life, that does not happen. The second, caregivers struggle, especially with regard to those emotions that I spoke about. Who can I talk to and who will understand me? So for example, if I were to say, I feel my job is thankless, will somebody turn around and say, give me advice, or will someone patiently listen to me? Yeah. So who can I talk to who will understand me for what I'm going through? The third, some of us might be caregivers who also have work. Can I take this to my workplace? And how do I balance my work and my caregiving responsibility? Next, do I have to do everything myself or can I get someone else to do it? A large number of people will not hire care assistants because then they will not be seen as good enough caregivers. They are not doing the stuff of their own. And that extends to many other things as well. Finally, while there is the World Wide Web, I do not want to overwhelm myself with the information either about the illness or whatever is available, etc., etc. Can I get information that is just right for me to make a decision now for myself? And therefore, I need to make quick decisions. It should be reliable, trustworthy information that I can access, that I need for just now. These are the top 5 dilemmas. Does anybody else have any comment to make on this? Yes, Esther, I hear you.
Hello.
Yeah, hi.
Yes, I actually, I was talking about that. So the moment you hear of somebody dying, the first thing the question comes up is, how old was that person? So the moment you say, let's say 75, 76,
Yeah.
80 something, they say, oh, it's okay then. So I'm like, why is it okay? Why is it okay for anybody to reach a certain age to die? Why? My only question would be is, don't you think that person who was 80 or 85 or 95 or 99 would have wanted to live longer? So sometimes I find that that reaction very saddening. So it's like above this age, you are okay to die.
Yeah.
You're eligible to die, actually, I would say.
Yeah, I think there is insensitivity in many ways. There is also, so for example, it's both ways. The tragedy of a young person passing is that they didn't get a chance to live.
Correct.
See life, right? But the tragedy of an older person passing is that they have such a huge history. They know so many people. They have impacted and influenced so many people. So it's sad for them to go. But the fact is, like a very dear friend of mine said, if there is one guarantee, then one thing that we all have to do, that is we all have to die. So that's the one truth of our lives. But that said, there is a different kind of a grief when an older person passes. And I suppose a different kind of grief when a younger person passes. And, it is, I agree with you. I find it a very tricky situation when someone says, oh, how old was that person? Okay. Anyone else?
These statements appear more as a cultural inheritance. It just automatically comes because you keep listening our elders talking about it and we parrot that.
Yeah.
So not much of mind is applied on that, whether this question is going to hurt somebody.
Yeah.
So these are the cultural inheritances. Probably we need to fine tune ourselves and see that we don't pass it on?
Yeah, sure. So it's a question of being able to compassionately question it, ask, and then, say that, is it really relevant? Should we be talking like this? All right. Anyone else? If there isn't, then I'd like to talk about the context in which caregiving is. The way that we look at caregiving, and I'm happy to hear your feedback about it, is this. Actually, there is a triad which is at the center, and you might not have a care assistant, or you might not have a paid caregiver, but just in case there is one, then there is a triad which is at the center. The main relationship is between the patient, the caregiver, the patient who is the care receiver, and the person who is the primary caregiver. And very often it is one person. This unit is influenced by doctors or healthcare practitioners. They are the biggest influencers. Then there is friends, family, and well-wishers. And then there are colleagues and managers, depending on where life stage is, and if these people are employed or not employed, then they could be colleagues or managers. Now, this circle of influence, or this circle of people who are influencers, are in the context, they belong to systems like hospitals or healthcare institutions, societies, clubs and communities, and workplaces and organizations. Now, there is a lot that needs to be done to kind of complete the circle. And here, one of the things that I'd like to talk about is what we are trying to do is build an ecosystem that integrates all these factors so that the caregiver can be supported in a holistic fashion, which is something in between. Of course, there is the world of social media and technology or communication. There is a lot of very interesting research. The first thing that struck me was that there has been a paper on caregiver burden since 1980 in India. And there is nothing in terms of practice or support systems for family caregivers. So there is some research, not adequate though. Most of the research is based in the US, UK, Australia, Canada, but there needs to be more. Most often organizations and NGOs approach the illness from the point of view of the illness. So you will find a multiple sclerosis society, an Indian Cancer Society, and so on and so forth. So there is that illness, or there is the patient, and then there is the caregiver. Educational institutions, while we have a lot of emphasis on academics or vocation, there is inadequate amount that is taught. None of us learns how to be a caregiver. None of us learns to appreciate what caregiving can mean, though all of us will be caregivers. Yeah. And of course, we do have a challenge that in terms of government policy and advocacy, there is palliative care itself is point number 12 on the healthcare 12-point agenda. And within that, caregivers are not yet in significance. So this is the overall stakeholder map that I wanted to highlight to you, that it is in this condition that the primary caregiver provides care to people who are unwell. And a rough calculation, which is a back of the envelope calculation, would mean that there are approximately 19 crore people in 2020 who are affected by incurable conditions. Yeah? So there are at least 10 crore family members who are looking after people. Now, we look at, when we spoke about what can you do to identify compassion fatigue, etc., how can we support family members, or how can we identify whether there is a burnout? We look at 7 elements of well-being. At the very core is the physiological, spiritual, and psychological well-being. And from an interface with the world is financial, legal, social. life and work purpose, and creative expression. So these 7 elements of an individual's well-being constitutes overall well-being. And stress is caused when there is an imbalance in the well-being. So what we do is we assess, and you could assess what is the level of burnout or compassion fatigue that an individual is at, break it down into the various elements of well-being, and say which is the one that is an enabler or which is the one that is not really an enabler, to say what is it that you need to focus on. For some of us, it might be physiological. For some of us, it might be legal or financial, and so on and so forth. But unaddressed chronic stress can lead to mental health issues, and resilience and compassionate caring can be done through practices of mind, body, and soul. We do not want resilience that is numb. We want resilience that continues to be compassionate and caring. So there have to be some practices, daily practices, that work with the individual to be able to prevent the accumulation of stress, the reasons for fatigue and burnout, and should there be any symptoms like irritability, like isolation, like an inability to connect with another person, then somebody can work with that caregiver and bring them back to a holistic sense of well-being. Any comments? And with that, I would like to highlight that each situation of caregiver or caregiving is unique. There are multiple factors that contribute to that person's stress or circumstances. So for example, understanding how is the individual taking their role? Are they a caregiver or a caretaker? What level of burnout are they at? What is the psychological type of a caregiver? For example, are you a very involved caregiver who likes to do everything by themselves? They are not really, worried about other circumstances. Or are you a caregiver who's a little more hands-off, but would rather have a different kind of balance? So knowing what type of a caregiver you are. Also, the life stage of the caregiver and the care receiver can be a source of stress or a difficulty. So for example, if both the caregiver and the care receiver are octogenarians or septuagenarians, then they could be a different circumstance. While if, let's say, a very young person is looking after a very old person and so on and so forth, there can be multiple permutations and combinations. And depending on which phase of caregiving you are, is this at early stage? Has the person's illness been identified just recently? Or is the person, been enduring the illness for a long time, might be more towards end of life? So depending on which phase of caregiving you are, it could contribute to the well-being of not just the caregiver, but the whole system. And finally, the 7 elements of well-being can help recognize the level of stress, the potential for burnout, and what must be done. Okay. I'm going to take a pause and highlight that because there are pressures of caregiving, we all recognize that caregiving can sometimes be isolating or alienating. And alienation takes away a sense of connection. And alienation prevents you from replenishing your resources of compassion. If you don't, compassion is something like you have to receive from someone else to give someone else. For that, you need a connection. You need to be able to meet and not be isolated. That's all that I have for my presentation. It's also almost time. I am happy to take any questions there might be.
Any last questions or comments or something?
I would like to add something.
Hi, Diane.
Yeah, hi. Well, thank you so much for articulating the entire picture. What a caregiver goes through. A lot of people don't talk about like things like compassion fatigue and all the issues and the importance of like putting on the oxygen mask first for the caregiver. Like I mean, I have a mom who's got Parkinson's. I mean, for the past 20 years, and I've kind of gone through all of these phases in themselves. And the thing that's helped, I mean, it's still a learning phase every day, but the thing that's helped me the most to get over like compassion fatigue or things is to take breaks, or to share the responsibility with even if it's for a short time. Because there've been phases where you've gone continuously without a break, and like I've found myself snapping at my mom, and I think to myself, this at that moment you feel it, but 10 seconds later, when you analyze the situation, you realize like the person's having their own issues, and it's down to your fatigue. So yeah, the things that's helped me the most is to take breaks, like even if it's an hour off, or or a day off. Like I think culturally, like I think especially in India, like a lot of burden is put on the primary caregiver, and it's one person. I think that's where the problem is. If it's if the entire responsibility is shared with one person, then it becomes harder. But if that responsibility is split between 2 or 3 people, or even for a short time, like an 80-20% split, or you get help from somewhere, then it's much easier. Like when you go back into a care mode, you have a fresher mind. You've got your compassion tank is filled up, as you would say. So yeah, no, it is a beautiful session that like, and given like the entire picture and almost all the phases that are that a caregiver goes through. So yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you for sharing your personal story about it. I'm not sure I know how to.
Yeah, Shrikala. So the takeaway home is, I suppose, it's okay to be illogical sometimes as a caregiver. It's okay to be grumpy sometimes. It's okay to be like, little whatever it is whatsoever. I mean, we all are human beings at the end of the day. We have that, our own me time and, those stuff. So, I mean, it's okay is what I feel after the session.
Indeed. Absolutely. I think that sometimes things are symptoms, and when we watch the symptoms, so what I would like to say is, I don't know how to pronounce your name. I'm going to just call you Biju, to elaborate a little bit on compassion fatigue. I think I will start with what Shrikala said, which is, first thing is to just recognize that it is okay to be tired. It is not possible. It is not humanly possible to provide long-term care singularly. Nobody is the savior, and nobody is that capable, and nobody needs to be that capable. So that's the first thing. You don't need to do it alone. You don't need to do it, in some kind of a gold standard or some kind of a high benchmark. There is no competition in caregiving, and there is no benchmark to be attained. So that's the first thing. So it's okay to feel human, tired, guilty, angry, frustrated, everything. That said, all these signs are symptoms. So when we do pick a symptom, for example, like Ryan said, I felt a little irritated or angry with my mother, it's a symptom. So I would recommend that there needs to be rituals that you do, that every day morning you set up your day in a certain way. And every evening you have some time to reflect on how the day went. If you do a short journaling or reflecting on how the day went or how the previous week was, and you think about it, then the likelihood of your making some shifts or some changes becomes easier. That's when something can come in, like what Ryan was also pointing out, which is that, listen, when I'm doing it all by myself, it's not working, I need to share this and so on. So maybe I cannot afford a cook who can come every day, but maybe I can have someone cook for me twice a week. Or maybe I don't need to make such an elaborate meal. Maybe I need to make 1/4 meal or something that will make my life simpler. So I think first, being kind to yourself. Second, reflecting on how you are providing care. Third, taking help. And fourth, sharing what you're really going through, which means being a part of a support group, talking to other people who might be in similar conditions, listening to other caregiving stories, recognizing that you are not the first one who is experiencing what you're experiencing, will take away the sense of isolation and loneliness. These are the top 4 that I would recommend. However, there is also, you could do an assessment of your overall well-being. And if you break it down, you will know probably you do have a good structure, you do have a good exercise and meditation routine. Maybe what you need to fix is your creative expression. Maybe what you need to fix is your work and life purpose alignment, or maybe what you need to fix is your legal well-being. So depending on what your individual circumstances are, you will know what to start with. And there is no shame. There is absolutely no harm in joining a support group. I hope that helps you, Dr. Biju. Okay. Anyone else? I think we're 5 minutes over time. Rajalakshmi, do you want to take over, please?